There are decisions you make in farming that follow you for years. Decisions that sit in your chest every morning when you fire up equipment that should have been retired a decade ago. Decisions that make you look away when a certain piece of iron rolls past your property line, because seeing it reminds you of the single moment you had everything lined up and you still said no. This is about one of those decisions, about a young farmer named Carter Webb who stood in a dealer lot on a September afternoon in 2019 with financing approved, a trade-in valued, and a brand new Massey Ferguson 7S.210 with a factory loader package sitting 30 feet away with his name already penciled onto the invoice. The numbers worked. The dealer was ready. The machine was perfect for his operation, and he walked away. Not because the deal was bad. Not because the math didn't add up. He walked because his uncle told him to wait, told him to be cautious, told him that buying new iron in good times was how farmers got buried in bad times. And Carter listened. He trusted the older generation. He walked out of that lot, drove home, and convinced himself he'd made the smart play. 3 years later, Carter Webb is still paying for it. Not in cash, in something worse. In watching that exact Massey Ferguson 7S.210 work his neighbor's field every single day, knowing it could have been his, knowing that one moment of hesitation cost him more than the monthly payment ever would have. Carter ran 940 acres outside of Worthington, Minnesota, corn and soybeans. His grandfather had started the operation in 1967 with 240 acres and a handshake loan. His father had doubled it by the 90s. Carter took over full-time in 2016 when he was 26 years old, and by 2019 he was running the place solo. His dad had moved to town after a back surgery that never quite healed right. It was Carter's show now. His decisions, his risk, and by the fall of 2019, his equipment was showing its age. He was running a 2005 Case IH MXM 190 as his primary tractor, a machine with 7,400 hours on it that burned oil, had a transmission that slipped in fourth gear, and needed a loader for nearly everything Carter did day to day. He'd been nursing it along for 3 years, telling himself it had another season left, then another, then another. But that September, the loader finally gave out. Hydraulic failure. The cylinder cracked during a simple bale move and dumped fluid all over the front axle. The repair estimate came back at $4,800. For a loader on a tractor worth maybe $35,000 on a good day. Carter stood in his shop staring at that estimate and realized he was done. Done patching, done limping, done pretending. He called Greenway Implement in Worthington and told them he wanted to look at new iron. Not used, not rebuilt. New. The kind of equipment that came with a warranty and a factory support number you could actually call when something went wrong. The dealer, a guy named Ron Feldman who'd sold equipment in the area for 30 years, didn't try to upsell him, didn't push him toward the biggest machine on the lot. Ron walked Carter straight to a Massey Ferguson 7S210 that had just come in on trade from a demo program. It had 340 hours on it, essentially new, and it came with a factory-installed MF956 loader that was already mounted, already plumbed, already dialed in. The 7S.210 put out 210 horsepower with a Dyna VT transmission that gave infinite variability between 0 and 31 miles per hour. It had a Category 3 hitch, hydraulic flow rated at 45 gallons per minute, and a cab so quiet you could hear the radio without turning it up. The loader had a lift capacity of 4,200 pounds at full extension and could swap attachments in under a minute. Ron pulled up the numbers. With Carter's Case IH MXM 190 as a trade at $32,000 and financing at 3.9% over 7 years, the payment came out to $680 a month. The tractor was $178,000 out the door with the loader plus tax and fees. Carter's operation cleared between $85,000 and $110,000 a year, depending on yields. The payment was high but manageable. Tight in bad years, comfortable in good ones. Carter sat in the cab for 20 minutes. He ran the loader through every motion. He tested the transmission. He turned on every switch. He looked at the fuel consumption estimate. He thought about what it would feel like to not worry about a breakdown during planting, to not spend weekend afternoons on his back under a tractor that should have been retired before he'd even taken over the farm. Ron told him the tractor wouldn't last. It was a demo unit priced to move, and Massey Ferguson had 3 other dealers in the region asking about it. If Carter wanted it, he needed to decide within 48 hours. Carter called his lender, approved in 6 hours. He called his accountant. The depreciation schedule worked. He called his wife. She said if he thought it was the right move, then do it. Everything was greenlit. Everything was lined up. Then he called his uncle. Carter's uncle, Dennis Webb, was 68 years old and still farming 480 acres on the south end of the county. He'd survived the farm crisis of the 80s by selling off half his ground and running equipment into the dirt. He didn't trust banks, didn't trust dealers, didn't trust new iron. He'd spent 40 years making decisions based on one principle: never buy what you can't pay cash for, and never buy new when used will do. When Carter told him about the Massey Ferguson 7S.2 hen, Dennis didn't even let him finish. "You're going to finance a $180,000 tractor when corn's at 360 cents a bushel?" Dennis said. "Are you out of your mind?" Carter tried to explain. The loader, the reliability, the warranty, the fact that his current tractor was costing him more in downtime than the payment would ever cost him in cash. Dennis cut him off. "I don't care what the dealer told you. They'll say anything to move iron. You wait. You buy used. You let some other fool take the depreciation hit, and you pick it up in 2 years for half the price." "But used inventory's tight right now," Carter said. "There's nothing out there in this range that isn't beat to hell or overpriced." "Then you wait longer," Dennis said. "I've been farming 50 years, Carter. I've seen guys like you buy new iron right before the market crashes, and I've watched them lose everything. You do not buy new equipment in good times. You buy it in bad times when dealers are desperate. That's when you have the power." Carter tried to push back, tried to explain that this wasn't about good times or bad times. It was about having equipment that worked, equipment that didn't leave him stranded in the field with a phone in his hand and a co-op full of grain waiting. But Dennis wasn't hearing it. "You walk away from that dealer. You tell them no. You run what you've got for 1 more year, and I promise you, you'll thank me." Carter hung up. He sat in his kitchen for 2 hours. He looked at the numbers again. He looked at his Case IH sitting in the shed with a cracked loader and a transmission that barely held 3rd gear. He thought about his uncle's voice, about 50 years of experience, about the farm crisis, about all the stories of guys who bought too much iron and lost their land, and he walked away. He called Ron Feldman the next morning and told him he'd changed his mind. Ron didn't argue, didn't try to pressure him, just said he understood, and that if Carter changed his mind in the next 2 weeks, he'd hold the price. After that, it was going to auction. Carter never called back. The Massey Ferguson 7.210 sold at auction 12 days later to a farmer named Jason Clausen, who ran 1,100 acres 2 miles east of Carter's place. Jason paid $172,000 for it, financed it through the same lender Carter had been approved with, and drove it home the same afternoon. Carter told himself it didn't matter, told himself he'd made the smart move, told himself his uncle was right. Then 2020 hit. In March, COVID-19 shut down half the economy. Commodity prices swung wild. Diesel spiked. Input costs climbed. But the real damage came in the equipment market. Interest rates, which had been sitting at 3.9% in the fall of 2019, dropped briefly during the lockdowns, then started climbing by late 2020. By the spring of 2021, tractor financing had jumped to 5.4%. By the fall of 2021, it was at 6.2%, and it kept climbing. At the same time, used equipment inventory disappeared. Farmers who'd been planning to trade up held onto their iron instead, afraid of the market. Dealers couldn't get new inventory because of supply chain delays. The few used tractors that did hit the market were either thrashed or priced like new. Carter spent all of 2020 and 2021 hunting for a replacement. He looked at every used tractor listing within 200 miles. He called dealers in Iowa, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. Everything was either too old, too expensive, or already sold by the time he got there. He kept running his 2005 Case IH MXM 190, dumping money into repairs, praying it would hold together through one more planting season, one more harvest. In May of 2021, the transmission finally gave out completely. Third gear was gone. Fourth gear slipped so bad, the tractor was useless for anything that required consistent power. The repair estimate came back at $11,000 for a tractor that was now worth maybe $28,000 if he could even find a buyer. Carter had no choice. He patched it with a used transmission from a salvage yard in Sioux Falls for $6,200, installed it himself over a long weekend, and got another 8 months out of the machine before the hydraulics started failing again. By the fall of 2022, Carter was desperate. He couldn't keep running a tractor that spent more time in the shop than in the field. He went back to Greenway Implement and asked Ron Feldman what was available. Ron showed him a 2018 Massey Ferguson 7S 180 with 1,900 hours on it. It didn't have a loader. The previous owner had removed it before trading the machine in. The tractor was $142,000. Financing was now at 7.1% over 7 years. The payment came out to $2,140 a month. Carter's trade-in value on his Case IH had dropped to $18,000 because of the transmission issues and the high hours. Carter ran the numbers. He couldn't make it work. The payment was too high. His margins were too thin. Corn prices had come back up, but so had everything else. Fertilizer, seed, diesel, land rent. There was no room. He walked out of the dealership again, this time with nothing. He kept limping along with the Case IH, kept dumping money into it, kept falling further behind. And every single time he drove past Jason Clausen's farm, he saw that Massey Ferguson 7S 210, the one he'd walked away from, the one that could have been his, still running, still clean, still doing exactly what Carter needed to do on his own farm. By the spring of 2023, Carter's situation had become unbearable. His Case IH was nearly undrivable. The cab door didn't seal right anymore. The air conditioning was shot. The hydraulics were so weak he couldn't lift a full pallet of seed without the system struggling. He was losing time on every job, falling behind on every deadline, and worse, he was losing confidence. Every time he hooked up to an implement, he wondered if the tractor would make it through the day. He went back to Ron Feldman one more time, but by now the market had shifted completely. New Massey Ferguson inventory was available again, but the prices had gone up and the financing rates were brutal. A new 7S 210 was now listed at $192,000 with the loader. Financing was at 7.8%. The payment was $2,480 a month. Carter couldn't do it. He wasn't approved for that amount. His lender had tightened up after watching too many farmers overextend during the price spikes. His debt-to-income ratio was too high. His trade-in was worth too little. The door had closed. So Carter did what he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He bought used, not from a dealer, from a private sale. A 2011 John Deere 7230R with 4,600 hours on it, no loader, and a list of minor issues the seller had been honest about. Carter paid $89,000 cash, draining most of his operating line of credit to do it. The tractor worked. Barely. It got him through the 2023 season, but it wasn't what he needed. It wasn't what he should have had. And every single day he drove past Jason Clausen's farm, and every single day he saw that Massey Ferguson 7S 210 working the fields. The one he'd been approved for, the one that had been priced right, the one his uncle had told him to walk away from. Jason Clausen's operation had grown. He'd added 180 acres in 2021, another 120 in 2022. By 2023, he was running 1,400 acres, and the Massey Ferguson 7S.210 had become the centerpiece of his fleet. It had 2,100 hours on it now, not a single major repair. Factory warranty had covered 2 minor sensor replacements and 1 hydraulic line that had developed a slow leak. Jason had paid it off early, refinancing in late 2021 when rates dipped briefly, locking in a lower payment and clearing the loan 2 years ahead of schedule. Carter ran into Jason at the co-op in October of 2023. They'd known each other for years, friendly but not close. Jason asked how Carter's season had gone. Carter said fine. Didn't mention the breakdowns. Didn't mention the used deer that had cost him 3 days during harvest when the DEF system had thrown a code and shut the tractor down completely. Jason mentioned he was thinking about trading the Massey Ferguson 7S 210 in for something bigger. Said it had been a hell of a machine, but he needed more horsepower now. Said he'd probably get $140,000 for it on trade. Carter didn't say anything. He just nodded, smiled, walked out to his truck. He sat there for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He thought about the fact that Jason was about to trade in a tractor that Carter had walked away from 3 years earlier. A tractor that had cost Jason $172,000 and was now worth $140,000 after 3 years of hard work. A tractor that had helped Jason expand his farm, grow his income, and position himself to move up to an even bigger machine. Meanwhile, Carter had spent 3 years running a tractor that had cost him thousands in repairs, then replaced it with another used machine that was already showing its age. He'd lost time, lost efficiency, lost opportunity, and all of it traced back to one moment. One phone call. One decision to listen to someone else's fear instead of trusting his own judgment. Carter never blamed his uncle. Dennis had been trying to help. He'd been passing on the lessons he'd learned in a different era, during a different crisis, under different market conditions. But those lessons didn't apply anymore. The farm crisis of the 80s wasn't the same as the equipment market of 2019. Waiting for a crash that never came wasn't wisdom. It was just fear. And Carter had let that fear cost him everything. By the winter of 2023, Carter had started looking at his operation differently. He'd stopped thinking about what he could afford and started thinking about what he couldn't afford to lose. He couldn't afford to lose more time, couldn't afford to lose more opportunities, couldn't afford to keep running equipment that held him back instead of moving him forward. He started putting money aside, started planning, started looking at what it would take to get back to where he should have been 3 years earlier. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. He wasn't going to let caution turn into paralysis. He wasn't going to walk away from the right deal just because someone else told him to be afraid. But the damage was done. 3 years was a long time in farming. 3 years was the difference between growing and surviving, between moving forward and standing still, between confidence and regret. And every time Carter drove past Jason Clausen's farm, he was reminded of it. Every time he saw that Massey Ferguson 7S 210 working a field, moving a load, doing exactly what Carter's equipment should have been doing, he felt it. Not anger, not jealousy. Just the quiet, heavy weight of knowing that he'd had his shot, that everything had been lined up, that the numbers had worked, the timing had been right, and the machine had been perfect. And he'd walked away. There are decisions in farming that follow you. Decisions that sit in your chest every time you fire up equipment that should have been replaced years ago. Decisions that make you look away when you see someone else running the iron you should have bought, living the outcome you should have had. Carter Webb made one of those decisions in the fall of 2019. He stood in a dealer lot with financing approved, a trade-in valued, and a Massey Ferguson 7S.210 sitting 30 feet away with his name on it. And he walked. 3 years later, he's still paying for it. Not in cash, in something worse. In knowing that one moment of hesitation cost him more than the monthly payment ever would have. In watching the machine that should have been his work someone else's field every single day. In understanding that the right call isn't always the safe call, and that sometimes the biggest risk is doing nothing at all. The Massey Ferguson 7S.210 is still out there, still working. Jason Clausen ended up keeping it another year after all. Said it was too good to let go. Said he'd run it until it didn't make sense anymore. Carter drives past it 3 times a week. He doesn't look anymore, doesn't need to. He knows it's there, knows what it represents, knows that some decisions you don't get to remake. You just carry them. And some iron you don't get a second chance at. You either take it when it's in front of you, or you spend the rest of your farming career wondering what would have happened if you had. Carter Webb knows. He lives it every day, and he'll never walk away from the right deal again.